Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. What I'm looking at today is 2019's Captive State, directed by Rupert Wyatt. Though before I begin, let's look at another movie, namely Star Wars. I mention it because a lot of people call Star Wars a children's story, and those are primarily people who don't know what they're talking about, or do know what they're talking about, though are being somewhat disingenuous, because what Star Wars is simple, in a sense that its story is very much between light and dark, good and evil, and it's very clearly defined what is good and what is evil. There's virtually no nuance in that movie. But to be fair, that doesn't make it a children's story. In fact, some of the best stories ever written are simple ones. The sense of the story they're telling isn't terribly complex. Complexity does not make something adult. And in the case of Star Wars, complexity is sacrificed for character. So there are lots of interesting, fascinating characters in the movie, though, as I already said, its story is not at all complex. What does that have to do with Captive State? Mainly, it has to do with the fact that it too has a relatively simple story, but the problem is in the execution. Visual aesthetic, its cinematography, which is so washed out, so sharp, it renders everything just murky and just kind of ultra-realistic, as if the sharpness were really turned up on everything, making everything feel kind of hopeless, for lack of a better term. That's kind of odd, but it's just the way the movie looks. And so that renders everything so uniform that there just doesn't seem to be a point. I mentioned Star Wars because, as I said, it's very clear who your good guys are and who your bad guys are. That's also the case with Captive State. Though the proportions matter as well. In the sense that in Captive State, in the beginning of the movie, you're introduced to the aliens. I think the scene lasts maybe 4 or 5 minutes, if that. Though the actual physical manifestation lasts about 1, maybe 2, if that. And pretty much, that's all you really see. That's not really fair. They do turn up later, but if they get 10 minutes of screen time in a movie that lasts an hour and 43 minutes, I'd be shocked. Very little of the time is dedicated to the aliens, because it's mainly a story about resistance, people against people, those who side with the aliens, collaborators if you will, and those that don't. Captive State is thematically very simple, though as I said, it gets its proportions wrong. In the sense that you see the aliens infrequently at best. Though it is an interesting movie, though it runs a little long. I don't think it needed to be an hour and 40 minutes. But nonetheless, it's well acted, it's well shot, but that's also part of its problem. If you watch, I want to say 20 minutes of this movie, you know exactly what the central mystery of it is. I won't tell you what that is, but I'm willing to bet you guess it. Because the movie has a problem that Star Wars didn't have. Namely, it puts everything in the same light. By which I mean, the collaborators with the aliens don't seem to live significantly better than those that are resisting the aliens. Now, they do show some examples of collaborators who are really doing particularly well. But on the whole, there is not, visually speaking, enough difference between the two. By which I mean, everyone looks the same. Imagine, let's go back to Star Wars. Imagine if Luke looked like a stormtrooper. Imagine if everyone looked like the Empire. It would make the rebellion idea a little odd and hard to understand if no one appears to be really suffering. And that's the case with Captive State. Everyone seems to be not in a good way. I don't care what side of the fence you're on. And as I said, that is likely not the case. But the movie doesn't show you the opulence the benefits of collaborating with aliens. It shows you none of that. It does show you quite a bit the squalor and the desperation people who don't collaborate go through, and it oftentimes will tell you that the collaborators are doing much better. For instance, there'll be mayors and police chiefs and that type of thing. But it doesn't show you. And a cardinal rule of any type of movie making or storytelling is show, don't tell. If at all possible, you show people what you're talking about. You don't tell them, you don't describe it to them. That's what this movie does. It doesn't show us the benefits, which makes the whole reveal of the mystery that I mentioned earlier not only predictable, but terribly, terribly underwhelming. And it's a pity, because it didn't need to do that. As I said, all this movie needed to do is show us opulence, show us how people are benefiting from the alien presence in the city. I believe it's Chicago. Don't tell us. It tells us a lot. But show us. But that also goes to the writing, which doesn't take into account the collaborators at all, virtually, except for occasional announcements or that type of thing. It doesn't really show you their lives. And that's an important aspect of this movie that is missing. That being said, Captive State is worth seeing. As I said, it's not a bad movie. It's interesting. The story is relatively simple, but a simple story badly told is not a good one. And that's Captive State's greatest flaw. This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. Do you agree? Disagree? Let me know down below. And since you're there, consider a like or a follow. Peace.